Hello everyone, and today we're back into another top 5, and we're going to be ranking all of the plant types from worst to best. So there are quite a few really good plant types in this game, and there are a lot of really bad plant types in this game. So yeah, we're going to be ranking them from worst to best. So let's head right onto this list. But before we do that, we are doing another giveaway. We are actually going to give away this Gamavari, which I found over a year ago. If you want to win this Gamavari, you got to say Gamavari in the comment section below. I will give you a number, and then within a few days, we will spin a random number generator wheel. And if your number gets picked, you will win the Gamavari. So yeah, if you say Gamavari in the comments below, you will have a shot at winning a Gamavari. So yeah. Let's head right onto this list, because, man, this is going to take a while. This list took forever to make. Number 15 on the list is actually going to be Wiki Wiki. Man, I really wanted to put Florence down here. I always considered Florence the worst plant type until I used Wiki Wiki, and this thing is worst. Not that much worse, but man, it just kind of does not know what it wants to be. The only thing it has is a high health and energy stat, and that's it. It doesn't really have the best moves. It does have a role. It is a very good support role with Wonder Herb, but the problem is there's no reason to have that role on a team of 7. You cannot fit that role onto your team for it to be very effective, especially in this meta. And while it does have some stuff like Poison, Sap Plant, Mudslide, Burn Up, Bequeath, there's just a lot better Loomians out there. Like, I can name a ton of pre-evolved Loomians which are better than Wiki Wiki. You could use Geklo, you could use Totemochi, Makoro, Christmas Cradle, Regular Cradle. I can go all day on just naming pre-evolved Loomians which are better than Wiki Wiki. I honestly think even Kabunga is better than Wiki Wiki. Yeah, it's not as bulky, but it at least actually hits decently hard because Wiki Wiki actually loses damage as it evolves, which makes absolutely no sense, and it absolutely stinks, and it deserves to be the worst Loomian in the entire game. Number 14 on the list is going to be Florence. It's honestly a miracle that this didn't get the worst spot on the list. It actually is not the worst. Awesome. This Loomian is still pretty bad, though, but it does have a couple things going for it. It does have slightly better bulk, and it does have Magnify, which means you could technically run a Bane of Haste version. It's not really that good because it has a range attack of 65, but hey, it's better than Wiki Wiki's 49 range attack. And also, while it does have a lot of very bad weaknesses, it does have a couple very good resistances, meaning that you could actually swap in against a few certain Loomians. Not to mention that I did actually have some success with Florence, unlike Wiki Wiki. I mean, in this clip, I got a Florence sweep, which is kind of rare. I don't think this will ever happen again. Plus, this was against a team that wasn't really TP trained, but you know what? I'm just going to take anything I can get because of the Florence sweep. I don't think anyone's going to argue with that. But yeah, this thing is extremely flawed. Has so many weaknesses. You almost have at least 3 Loomians that can deal with Florence on your team, and it's not to mention, it's probably the most predictable Loomian in the game as well. You can pretty much predict what it's going to use. Sap Plant, Dodge, Pestilence, Dodge, Poison, Dodge. Like, it's the most predictable Loomian in the entire game. I'm honestly just happy that it's not the worst on the list, and it's only the 2nd worst plant type in the entire game. Number 13 on the list is actually going to be Festifer. My goodness. Jeez, these first 3 spots, they're not really that good. At least with Festifer, it actually has a decent attack stat and solid bulk on both sides. But you know how people complain about Wakalaka's defensive typing on how it's absolutely atrocious? Festifer's might be even worse. I mean, it doesn't have as many quad weaknesses, and it's not quad weak to dark. But it's still weak to dark, weak to metal, weak to brawler, and quad weak to fire. So this thing has a ton of weaknesses as well. And since it's slower and it doesn't have Bane of Haste, it makes it a lot harder to really utilize Bane of Haste with it because it only has 22 speed. And yes, you could technically use a regift. You could use it as a regift user, but you know, there's also Cosmere and Fishkarna that uses regift better, so there's not really any point for it. I guess it is alright when you use it. It's not terrible when you use it. Unlike Florence and Wiki Wiki, it actually can be used on some teams, which is actually really good, considering that it's the third worst plant type in the game. But yeah, it's not amazing. But it is better than Florence and Wiki Wiki. And that's why it's number 13 on the list. Number 12 on the list is actually going to be Wakalaka. Wakalaka might have the worst defensive typing in all of Loomian Legacy. I mean, being quad weak to dark is awful. It's awful. There is another plant type, Hollybunch, which is quad weak to dark, but at least it doesn't have any other big weaknesses that really destroy it. For Wakalaka, it has 2 quad weaknesses and 4 regular weaknesses, which just really kills it. Although, it's not the worst. It's horrible, no doubt about it. But you can actually swap in against a few Loomians. You can swap in against Protagons, Zulongs, and you can actually utilize it okay. It actually is an okay Bane of Haste user. And when you get a Bane of Haste up, Wakalaka can actually be pretty effective. Not to mention that it actually has some really good coverage, and it has Rejuvenate. There are quite a few pros Wakalaka has, unlike the other 3 plant types on the list. So that's why it is higher than all the other plant types I talked about already, but Wakalaka isn't so good neither. I mean, this list has probably some of the weakest Loomians out of any list I've ever done, which is just kind of crazy. The plant typing definitely needs a buff in the future. But yeah, Wakalaka at least does have some stuff going for it. It hits decently hard, and it can actually be utilized under Bane of Haste, and that's why it's number 12 on the list. Number 11 on the list is actually going to be a massive spike. It's going to be Bonfino. Bonfino may be number 11, but it's miles better than Wakalaka. But it's not really that good neither. It is fast, but that's kind of all it has. This is a Loomian that kind of doesn't know what it wants to be. The bully ability is broken. It has been broken ever since this thing came out, and it kind of doesn't know what it wants to be. It has average bulk, it has average attack stats, it has a lot of support moves, but none of them that can be really fully utilized. You can't really utilize Baffle because your speed's too fast. Charade, Loomians could swap out. You do have Photosynthesis, which is nice, and some very good coverage, but that's kind of it. Bonfino does have a very good defensive typing, besides being quad weak to Toxic. Its defensive typing is pretty solid overall, but other than that, Bonfino doesn't really have too much going for it. It just doesn't really know what it wants to be. Not to mention that you could also run the Stolfino set and be really annoying. I mean, Stolfinos might be some of the most annoying Loomians to deal with in the game. But overall, Bonfino's okay. It can be utilized alright. It just doesn't know what it wants to be, and that's why it is ranked this low on the list. Plus, I don't usually see it do well in battles. Number 10 onto the list is actually going to be Whipple Drift. Whipple Drift just got buffed recently, getting Jetstream and Nature's Force, and man, that actually made Whipple Drift pretty solid now, because you can actually hit Loomians decently hard. Without a Magnify, this thing really couldn't hit really hard. So now, having the extra power moves, having 90 power moves instead of 70 power moves, can make a very big difference, because without that Magnify, Whipple Drift doesn't really hit that hard. I mean, especially with all the range tanks that are in the game currently, like Metatoad, Venolin, Terraclaw, Thenamars, like, they could still soak the super effective hits pretty well off of Whipple Drift, unless you get a Magnify. So, the fact that it got buffed up attacks now makes Whipple Drift actually pretty solid after a Magnify. It's still very good as a Bequeath user, and it's still a very good Loomian overall. The flaws, though, it's quad weak to Icicle Traps, and it's really hard to use as a Bequeath user, and it just struggles overall. So, it's still it's a solid Loomian in some certain situations, but overall, it's just average. It's an average Loomian that can do the job pretty well, but there's a lot better plant types out there that are a lot better than Whipple Drift. And that's why Whipple Drift is number 10 on the list. Number 9 onto the list is actually going to be Gastroc. Yes, I am honestly shocked that I put Gastroc this high, but it might be one of the most underrated range tanks in the entire game. Let's get the elephant out of the room, though. It's really bad melee defense-wise, But it does have Briar Block, meaning you could actually kind of chip melee attacks. And its range defense is so good, it might actually be the bulkiest range tank in the entire game. I don't think there's a range tank bulkier than Gastroc, which is kind of insane to think about, considering that there's Venolin, Terraclaw, Sanimars, Gargoyle Defense. So the fact that this thing is actually bulkier is insane. It also has Stratagem, so it can actually hit really hard, has Return to Sender, and Photosynthesis. So this thing actually has a lot going for it. And even though it's not the greatest thing in the world, especially against melee attackers, like, oh my gosh, a toddler can punch it and bring it down to half health. But against range attackers, this thing can soak multiple super effective moves. Yes, I said it. Multiple super effective range moves. And that's why Gastroc is so good. If you know how to use Gastroc and use it correctly, it can actually be utilized really well and can be a pretty good asset for a team. And that's why it's number 9 on the list. Number 8 onto the list is actually going to be Mulmerk. I wanted to put this below Gastroc, but it did have better bulk on both sides, not to mention that it actually has very solid utility, especially in doubles. But look at its bulk. Its stats are pretty average across the board. I mean, it kind of has stats on everything besides speed, but it's really unique. I think it's the only Loomian in the game that can actually lower the range defense and melee defense of the opposing Loomians, because it has Aqua Jaws and March Wave. Really good for 2v2s, especially when combined with a bait user like Copperage. It also has that very good defensive typing, just like Bonfino. Apart from toxic types, you can pretty much soak any hit in the game, which is really nice. It also has a healing move, has Driving Force, has Boom Bash, has Bulk Up. There's a lot of different ways you can actually run Mulmerk. The reason why it's not higher is because, once again, it's very slow, and it's very hard to use most of the time. Like, you gotta be really good at using Mulmerk if you really want to fully utilize it. But overall, Mulmerk is just a very good Loomian, with very good stats, with a very good move pool. It's good. That's what it is. It's not better than good, it's not worse than good. It's just good. And that's why it's number 8 onto the list. Not to mention that it can be bulky enough to sometimes live quad effective hits, which is just insane to really think about. So yeah, Mulmerk, number 8 on the list. Number 7 onto the list is actually going to be Holly Bunch. Yes, I'm shocked I'm putting Holly Bunch this high as well. But this thing might be one of the most unique Loomians in the entire game. And I've been using it quite a bit recently, and it's actually done really well. Its bulk is pretty solid on both sides, and it actually hits pretty hard. Since it has a very high energy stat, you can actually hit extremely hard with Holly Bunch, especially when you combine it with like a Energy Orb, Chocolate Bar, or Kabunga Coffee. This thing is just a very solid Loomian, and even though it does have that quad weakness to Dark, which does suck, I'm not gonna lie, that quad weak to Dark does really well suck. Other than that, it hits decently hard, has Spectral Burst to hit plant types. Nova Blast is a very powerful light type move. Very good against Obsidiogons and light types. Very good against plant types. This thing is honestly really underrated, and honestly has been really good. When it came out, it was kind of mid to trash. But ever since it got Spectral Burst and its stats buff, this thing has actually been very scary. And I actually see it quite threatening sometimes on certain teams. And that's why Holly Bunch is number 7 on the list. Although, I don't think it can get higher because it's too slow, and that quad weakness to Dark doesn't help. Number 6 onto the list is actually going to be Colossustrops. Colossustrops is either a top 3 Loomian or just number 10. Because of Frail Armor, Rageful Plushie. It's a dice roll. Because you can't really use this against range attackers, but against melee attackers. And if you get that Frail Armor, Rageful Plushie boost, and a Brawn boost, this thing can easily sweep. Especially after the Frail Armor buff, where you get +2 speed instead of just +1, which can absolutely make Colossustrops sweep pretty much any team. Because the thing is, Colossustrops has really good coverage. Has Plant, Ancient, and Earth. I think it's the best coverage out of any Loomian on this list. So, Colossustrops, after a Frail Armor boost, can outspeed everything in the entire game, which is just insane to think about. And then you get a Brawn boost and a Rageful Plushie boost on top of that. Colossustrops can be the best Loomian in the game. but without it, it's only average. Like, if you're up against range attackers, you're not getting the Rageful Plushie, or nor the Frail Armor boost, which just kind of stinks overall. So, yeah. Colossustrops, if you make it work, it's amazing. If not, though, it's not the greatest thing in the world. And that's why it's not in the top 5. But it still definitely deserves a lot of praise. And that's why it's number 6 on the list. Number 5 onto the list is actually going to be Sea Drake. People might be shocked that Sea Drake is this high considering Tata exists, but Sea Drake is still a very good, hard-hitting plant melee attacker. And with Sword Slam and Anomaly, this thing can just snowball damage over and over again. And this might be one of the best 2v2 Loomians as well. Not just with utility, but if you have a bait user, your Sea Drake does not get hit, and then you just keep getting a melee attack increase, melee attack increase, melee attack increase with Thorn Slam. And then you can just destroy the opposing Loomians. When combined with a bait user, that's when you see Sea Drake at its best, because it's very frail. It can actually get down very easily just because, it's a pure plant, so it has a lot of weaknesses, and it's very frail on both sides. So, but if you get a bait user for 2v2s, it's almost unstoppable to beat Sea Drake. Not to mention that even in singles, Sea Drake can do some massive damage, especially in the late game. I mean, it one-shots a Surkame. That's insane. It one-shots a Surkame, and we all know how melee bulky Surkame is. So, yeah, Sea Drake definitely deserves to be top 5 on this list, even with Tata overall being better than it. I find Sea Drake to be better late game overall because if you can get that +1 from Thorn Slam, you can absolutely sweep teams. And that's why Sea Drake is in the top 5. It also has solid coverage as well, which also helps out a lot. Number 4 onto this list is actually going to be Baneki. Baneki is very solid. It's the pure definition of a very solid Loomian everywhere. It's a very good stall Loomian with Quicksand, Poison, Dodge, and Sap Plant. But you can also use the Clutch Plushie Magnify set. And with the Clutch Plushie Magnify set, this thing can be very effective. I've had battles where Banekis just completely took over the battle. Especially with after a Magnify boost. And with Boom Dash to hit those pesky bug types, Baneki is definitely a very solid plant type. Yes, there are quite a few walls, there's Harvesect, and there's also quite a few range tanks that can soak your hits. But overall, Baneki is a very solid Loomian, and after a Magnify, could sweep a lot of teams if not careful. It definitely deserves to be in the top 5 of this list. It also has Poison, so you can throw a Poison out at the opposing Loomian. You can also Sap Plant. You can just do a lot with Baneki. There's a lot of different ways to run it, and there's just a lot of different ways you can utilize it overall on your team. And that's why Baneki is number 4 on the list. Not to mention, it's probably one of the best Clutch Plushie users in the entire game. And after a Magnify, this thing can be a very good late game sweeper, and that's why it's number 4 on the list. Number 3 onto the list is actually going to be Nevermer. Nevermer is fantastic. Plant Spirit is amazing defensively. And with Plant Ancient Spirit offensively with Bulk Up, oh my goodness, this thing is awesome. Look at its stats as well. It's actually relatively bulky on the range side, and after a Bulk Up, you can be relatively bulky on the melee side as well. And even though this thing doesn't hit that hard without the crit, if you do get the crit, oh my goodness, this thing can absolutely destroy a lot of teams. Once again, in the late game, this is another very good late game cleaner right here. And it's better because it actually has multiple immunities. It's immune to light, and it's immune to Brawler, while also not being weak to Dark. It is weak to Icicle Traps and Fire, but other than that, it's really awesome. Its defensive typing is simply fantastic to build around, and that's why Nevermer is so well utilized on most teams. Even though it doesn't hit the hardest the most of the time, and you were pretty much relying on the crit to do extra damage, it's still a very solid Loomian, and when combined with Barbs and Poison Barbs, it pretty much does the extra damage for you, so Nevermer doesn't even have to rely on the crits anymore. So yeah. Nevermer definitely deserves to be in the top 3 of this list, especially compared to the other plant types we talked about already. So yeah, Nevermer, number 3. Number 2 onto the list is actually going to be the grass type starter himself, Tata. Tata is fantastic. It's a Loomian with 104 speed, with 126 melee attack, with Awakening and a 120 power stab move. Yeah, Tata is pretty overpowered. It can even be used as a ranged variant, but its ranged variant isn't the greatest. I would just recommend running the melee form. It also has Jungle Jitsu, which can cause crits. You have Toxic Tail to hit those pesky plant types, because those plant types are really scary. And you also have Poison and Barter. Boots Tata with Barter can absolutely destroy a lot of tanks, while Poison can deal with Harvest. The only flaws here, and the reason why Tata isn't number 1, is because toxic types are pretty much a guarantee swap-in. Thankfully, though, for Tata, there aren't many toxic types that can actually soak melee hits too well. Venolin can, and also Helvantic can, but other than that, despite all the other toxic types resisting your moves, I think you can two-shot all the other toxic types, which is just insane to think about. Tata is one of the hardest hitting Loomians in the entire game, and it definitely deserves to be in the top 3, but it didn't get number 1. Let's get to the best plant type in the game right now. The best plant type in all of Loomian Legacy is Chartiki. Some people might be shocked that Chartiki is number 1, but Plant Fire is simply fantastic. With Muck Blast for coverage, solid bulk on both sides, a decent speed stat, decent attack stat, has photosynthesis, has burn up to get rid of barbs. Its plant and fire dual typing just gets utilized so well. Chartiki might be one of the most utilizable plant types in the entire game, and even though it does have a couple weaknesses, like to air and to toxic, it's not weak to earth, it's not weak to ice, and it's not weak to a lot of the other typings, which is just insane. Like, this dual typing might be one of the best in the entire game. Chartiki also hits solidly hard, can get poisons with Muck Blast, has Provoke, has Barter. There are so many ways you can utilize Chartiki, and it can fill so many roles on your team. That's why Chartiki is the best plant type in the entire game. It might not reach the highs of Tata, but it's the most consistent overall and can be the most utilized out of any plant type in the entire game. And my goodness, it's not even close. Chartiki is definitely the best plant type in the entirety of Loomian Legacy. So yeah, here it is, Chartiki, the best plant type in the entire game. I hope you guys enjoyed this list of me ranking the plant types from worst to best. If you say Gamavari in the comments below, I will give you a number, and you will have a chance to win. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see y'all all later. Bye-bye!